Leon Olegin here, and welcome to At Home with Music as we continue our series from medieval to modern. And we come now to the final music period that I'd like to cover in this overview, and that is the modern era. And it starts around 1900 and goes, of course, to the present day. Now, as you've probably noticed, these musical periods that we've been looking at, they tend to overlap. Last time we talked about the Impressionists, and some of the Impressionists kept going until the early part of the 20th century, at the same time that many of our more modern composers were getting their start. And so we're going to learn some interesting things about the modern era. Obviously, we can't cover everything, and we can't mention every composer. We'll mention some of the more prominent ones in the era, but the interesting thing about studying this particular period of music is that we're still in it. And who knows what's going to come after that. So this goes right up to the present day. So let's take a look now at this era of classical music. As we look for a few minutes at the modern period of classical music, we want to ask the question, what changed? What new methods and forms were introduced? Now, if you listen to music from basically the beginning until now, until we reach the modern period, it has a certain harmonic sound. There are certain harmonic methods that have to do with the chords that are used and the progressions, chord progressions that are used. You remember in a video that I did a while back, I showed you some of the basic chord progressions. And these form the basis of much of the music that was written, starting even back in the Renaissance era and then solidified in the Baroque era and going all the way to the Romantic era. But by the time we get to the end of the Romantic era, the Romantic period, many composers began to feel restrained by these, in a sense, music rules, that progressions had to go a certain way and things had to sound a certain way. And so that's when we covered the Impressionists, and they started to move away from traditional music harmony or music theory. Debussy was one of the first to reject the rules of 19th century harmony as they were taught, and instead he borrowed techniques from East Asia and Russia, and then he was associated with the French painters of his time, and that led some people to call him an Impressionist. He didn't really like being called an Impressionist, but nevertheless, his music, the music of Ravel, and some of the other composers of the Impressionist era, they paved the way for modern music. And so essentially, when you reach the modern era, it's like all bets are off, all restraints are moved, and composers began to use all kinds of different methods to get the sounds they wanted. One of the most important composers of the modern era was Igor Stravinsky. Much of the music that he wrote did not use the harmonic methods of the 19th century. He took folk music from his native Russia and put it in his music, and he used harmonic techniques that were very modern sounding. In fact, when his ballet, The Rite of Spring, was premiered in 1911, it was so startlingly modern sounding that it caused what some people refer to as a riot. People did not like what he was doing. It's actually a ballet score. It's striking to listen to. If you've ever seen the Disney movie Fantasia, an excerpt from The Rite of Spring is included in the score. It has something to do with dinosaurs, but Stravinsky never liked that. Anyway, Stravinsky was an important composer. Another one was Charles Ives. He was an American composer. He did some really wild stuff. You know, he took country church music, dance hall music, military music, and just mixed it all together. And he would take tunes like Yankee Doodle and put it in his music. Another composer from the modern era was Béla Bartók. He was an ethnomusicologist. In other words, he was trying to find out all the different folk tunes that were out there. And sometimes his works contained settings of these folk tunes, or they were influenced by folk tunes. He was an entirely original composer. Now, Arnold Schoenberg, he went even farther from the 19th century harmonic style and was writing music that would be called atonal. In other words, it wasn't in a specific key. no note in it or no chord in it was more central than any other note. And of course, he just came up with some wild sounding stuff. He invented what was known as the 12-tone system, a technique for organizing music without the need for a central note or key signature. His music is an acquired taste, at least for me. Aaron Copland is another famous composer, and he drew on American folk music. Actually, a lot of his music is a little less harsh sounding, perhaps, than Schoenberg. And then you have some composers who worked under Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. And Stalin did not like modernistic music or music that broke with the 19th century style and the harmonic technique. Stalin and his party wanted music to show off the Russian people, music that was simple, triumphant sounding. But the famous composer Shostakovich, his music was more ironic. And so he often got in trouble with Soviet authorities because of the kind of music that he wrote. There's so much more to cover. So many more composers because, of course, the modern era just keeps on going right up until the present day. What we're going to do is just stop at this point and give you some examples of modern era music to listen to. And let me know what you think in the comments. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts about this style of music because it's wide-ranging and some of it is very challenging to listen to. And then we're going to go all the way back to the beginning and look at some of the lives of the great composers in a little bit more detail. Concentrate on one composer at a time, and this is going to take a while, but I think it's going to be very interesting because it's a very much a varied group of guys and gals, men and women, and so much great music out there for you to discover. I may not go totally in chronological order. I may jump from period to period so that we don't get stuck for too long in one particular era. So you may hear about a Baroque composer one week, and then the next week you might hear about a modern composer, and then after that a classical era composer or romantic. We'll just, whatever I feel like putting up at the time, that's who we're going to talk about. But I think you'll find them all very interesting. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I look forward to sharing more and more about music history with you as we end this series, Medieval to Modern, which is just an overview of all the various music periods. And then we're going to go back and begin our series on the famous composers and their music. So be sure to like the video because that helps the channel, and subscribe to At Home with Music if you haven't already. And thank you for your support.